On the Writer's Gym today, we're joined by actor, comedian, poet, novelist and soon-to-be memoirist Nigel Planer. Welcome to the Writer's Gym. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpan. Nigel, welcome to the Writer's Gym.
Hello.
Hello. As always, we have Rachel Knightley.
Hello.
We have Emily Inkpan.
Hello.
And for those of us listening on the podcast who can't see what's going on, we also have a cardboard cutout of Neil from The Young Ones, a character that Nigel played a few years ago.
Iconic.
Iconic.
An iconic
character. Yes, indeed.
Absolutely. Very well known and loved.
On the very well known and loved, entirely coincidentally to doing this podcast and having worked with Nigel briefly in January, I was looking in Vinted at things like that, and I found something that there wasn't anything like in the world as far as that was concerned, which was just flicking through comedy things. I found Neil the hippie looking at me, and I looked at the entry, and there was that wonderful photo that I sent to you, Nigel, just because I thought it was just of itself, it was so beautifully surreal, was this little Neil standing in front of a radiator, the radiator being enormous, the expression on his face, good God, I knew that would happen.
Stand-up cardboard cutout of a photo, yes. They made some that were life-size at the time. It was a promotional thing for shots, for Neil's Book of the Dead or for the record. I can't remember which. Probably the book, because of the wardrobe I'm wearing. And it's one of the photo session.
If that's any help, you have a yin and yang on your knee.
They made these life-size, embarrassing, actually, life-size cardboard cutouts. But that's a sort of half life-size, so it could go on the shelf at the counter, I suppose.
Yeah, and the timing of it, if you don't mind me asking about it, was brilliant, simply because you told me what your memoir might be called, and here was an opportunity.
I've been working on a memoir. I'm nearly at the end of a shaky first draft, and I want, if anybody's got a good idea for a title, it's very difficult to think of a title. Once you've written it, you might know what it's about. I mean, it's obvious what it's about, but what the heart of it is. And I'm still without a title, but one title that came up was suggested by somebody on the internet, because I did a day in Bristol filming at the Young Ones house where the Young Ones was filmed. And they got a shot of me sitting on the wall where there used to be a shot of Neil sitting on the wall. And somebody superimposed the two photographs and put me now sitting beside Neil then on the same wall in the same photo. And somebody came up with the tweet beside myself. And I thought, that might be a good title. I don't know. I'm test running it on people. So do chip in with any possible titles.
It was interesting, particularly for me, because when we were speaking last time, I was just starting that memoir course at Riverside Studios. And I used the introduction. I think I told you at the time, I'd used the introduction from Making Other Plans from your poetry collection as a text to discuss memoir, because in terms of the idea that autobiography is in the right order and memoir is around theme, you'd done something, or you'd explained something that I'd not seen explained so well anywhere, which was, I've met or invented some of these people, some are written in the voices of other people, I is not always necessarily me. And that permission to fictionalize some of it, but also know that some of the poems were completely autobiographical, and find a way to not be held back by that, to still have freedom to explore what you want to explore without being too much defined by it, for me is really how to keep people curious, how to keep people writing.
That was very useful in poems. I'm not sure whether that would work in prose. In the poems, it's good, because it also gave me the excuse. Some of them, which are autobiographical, have stuff in them to disguise that. So So you can get away with stuff more easily with poems, you see. So there's one that it's written, I'm still concerned about my mother and blah, blah. It goes through various verses until you realize maybe by verse 3 of this poem, it's a woman speaking. It's a woman I used to know speaking about how her mother is so overwhelming. And now that one's fairly obviously not me, because it's a woman who has an overbearing mother, who's married to someone and has children herself now. But there are other ones where maybe you don't want to come out fully autobiographical. That's the problem with a memoir, as you no doubt did in your workshop. There's all sorts of problems, isn't there, to do with shame of your own.
Yeah.
Coming up with some things that are a bit shameful or illegal or libelous, or hurtful to people that you love. And so in the poetry book, Making Other Plans, it was an accidental memoir because I was offered, would you like to do a collection of poems? And I put it together. They go right back to 1970 when I was 17, and I put them backwards. So it's like a sort of backwards memoir. But poetry's, it was a lot easier, and the title was a lot easier, Making Other Plans. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. Comes from a Leonard song lyric. In fact, I made a haiku out of it. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. Poetry also.
This was fascinating as well, because you use the haikus as autobiography in places, and particularly around lockdown and Christmas, the way I had forgotten that the last line of a haiku was meant to sort of upstage, go back on, be a contrast with what the first two were about, and I'd completely forgotten that. And then you'd done that in every single one of them that I'd never seen.
Well, that's very good of you. Thank you for observing that, because a lot of people say they're writing haikus and they're not. Yeah.
You've talked about your poetry as a way of looking back at events in your life, but I know you've also done that in some of your fiction as well. And I saw an interview with you where you were talking about something from Jeremiah Bourne story, which are a time traveling stories, aren't they? And I think you'd referenced some events that had happened to your family around about the time of the last war.
No, I think you've got the wires a little crossed there, because what happened was I wrote the book. It's set in 2019, 2132, and 1910, all in the same house in London. And you travel in time but not place. Jeremiah travels in time but not place, and there's a whole sort of network of logic about that. But the thing that I think you're referring to is when it came to do the publicity. This is the trouble we all get into. You get the book out, you came to do the publicity, and the press agent says, well, what have you got? What kind of a narrative have you personally got that we can interest any kind of magazine or newspaper about? And so I said, well, yes, my dad came over from Germany, but their family was Romanian in 1933. And so if you now Google it, the way the whole thing works is exactly what you've just said. Is now the book is now identified with the publicity of the book, but it's got actually nothing to do with it.
That happens more than we think, though, doesn't it? I mean, I was telling the story of a phobia for a memoir thing, and very long story short, I had to get chainsawed out of the Fimbra Theatre's toilet once when I got locked in it, when I already had a phobia about getting locked in things.
Oh, who hasn't had that happen?
Yeah, and the thing is that you could...
More interesting
the mirror, I promise this will be relevant in one moment. The mirror was on the door, so you could watch yourself getting more and more terrified as you continued to bang on this thing. And I was telling the story of how we make patterns on that. We bring our own histories to it. And I was saying, now, that had only happened once, blah, blah, blah. My uncle, who was listening to this, then told me later, actually, there is another line to this. This happened to you when you were 10 in France, and I had completely forgotten it. What I do find interesting is it's a little bit like when readers will say, oh, I love the way you did that or the other, and you'll go, yeah, great. Had no idea it was there. That will happen sometimes, but we're pattern-forming creatures, storytelling creatures. Sometimes we don't know.
That also happens, doesn't it? That you don't know what you're writing about until A, you're finished, but B, someone else sees that in it. That's the terrifying thing, is you've no idea what you've actually done. I don't know if you find that, but I think many people find that. But in this case, to answer your question thoroughly, there is actually no connection other than the sheer commercial activity of having to do interviews, and which is a shame in a way, because it's not particularly the story I was writing about, but
it's become associated with the book through.
I mean, this is marketing. This is what marketing people do. They go in and they say, okay, how are we going to sell this? And then inadvertently, what marketing is about telling stories to get people to buy a product. In that case, I mean, technically, the marketing team, you could argue, told a very good story as long as the book sold, but it ended up almost in the public consciousness becoming the story that was being told, as opposed to the original.
That's quite, I mean...
Emily speaks as an ex-marketing person.
Yeah, I hadn't thought that it had done that much damage. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But it is actually damaged. That's what you're saying, isn't it? Does it matter? I suppose the only thing is, if it was very successful marketing-wise, and the campaign was on brand, and that's what people were buying the book for, and then they look through the book and say, well, it's not there. There's nothing there. It's like saying a David Bowie movie, when he's only in it for 20 seconds, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, but what 20 seconds?
Yeah, what is 20 seconds? Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm just sort of taking on board that point, that I hadn't realized that narrative of my life had become connected up so much with the book, which, of course, I am including that narrative in a memoir, and there's a poem about it in my Making Other Plans book. But in fact, in the Jeremiah Born in Time book, going through to make sure, absolutely, there's no reference, no connection whatsoever.
Does it feel very different writing the memoir now that it's got the word memoir stuck on its forehead?
Yeah. And of course, the poems were actually written then, whereas the memoir you're trying to write now. And there's an awful lot of, I noticed on your questions, there's an awful lot of stuff that's been written in the past, notes, journal entries, diary entries. And I went and looked through an awful lot of the articles that I've written, and you can pick out a bit, but you've basically got to rewrite in the light of the book that you're now writing.
Yeah, reframe it. You've got to look back on it.
Yeah, because each chapter, each section has to lead to the next section, doesn't it? You can't, I mean, that was the first attempt I made when that agent told me that, you've got to write a memoir. So I thought, I hate memoirs. I like Craig Brown. I don't know if you've read any of his books, the one about the Beatles, the one about Princess Margaret, etc. And they appear to be completely random scattergun things with just bits of information here, then there, then there. That's how they appear to be. And I thought, I'll have a go like that and just put information in any order in. And she sent me back, I showed it to her, and she sent me back an email saying, it seems to me that you don't really want to write this. Bang to write, so I thought,
Well, Nigel, I was going to ask a bit about, I think that's probably a question about structure, isn't it? And, you, as someone who's written fiction, you've written scripts. How did you start to plan writing your memoir? I mean, you've mentioned trying to find contemporaneous writing, the journal entries, the articles that you wrote at the time. But did you start with a structure and try to write around that?
Or indeed, for other things, what's been the most fun to write?
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, I got very lucky, very, very lucky, because I was on, which one was it? Berkhamsted Festival. I was doing a reading for Jeremiah Born in Time. I was invited to Berkhamsted Festival. And in the audience was a poet called Henry Normal, who I knew quite well, but before he became a big TV executive, he was a poet, and I was a poet back in the 90s. This is. And I went on tour with him, and we did lots of gigs together for a couple of years, and then he dropped out to become TV exec. The TV exec, and I carried on with the management who was booking our gigs, and I even did some gigs with John Cooper Clarke other poets, can't remember, on that circuit for a couple of years. Anyway, so I bumped into Henry again, and it turns out he's resigned from being a TV exec, and he's putting out poetry books again and going back on tour. And he said, well, do you want to come out on tour again with me as a poet? And have you got a collection? I said, well, no, I don't have a collection. He said, well, here's my publisher. I'll put you in touch, see if they want to do a collection.
He really wanted to go on tour with you. That's the subtext here. He really, really
reality
wanted to
shaped itself around his wish to go on tour with you. Nicely done.
That's right.
He made this happen. That's an executive and a half, I'm just going to say.
And well, wait, it gets even more so because he's quite a driving force, literally driving, because he drives to all the gigs. And he likes to chat. He's like part of the famous Manchester comedy scene. He wrote and produced most of Steve Coogan's material and the Royal Family and that whole sort of period of comedy telly, Gavin and Stacey. That's his era. But he now retired from that, went back to poetry. But he was the producer on those things, and he can't, in my opinion, he says he's retired. He can't stop putting things together, making things happen. So I owe the poetry collection to him. And then as soon as we're out on tour, he's saying, so what was the moment you first decided you wanted to do comedy? What was the meaning behind that? When you wrote that, what did it? And he's like grilling me almost on the drives. And then after a few weeks of our tour, he says, right, so chapter 1 of your memoir has to be that thing. Remember that thing you said that so and so and so. And he's remembered it all. And then he says, what was the most humiliating? When was the lowest ebb? And I said, well, I can't put that in a memoir. He said, yes, but you redeemed yourself, didn't you? You succeeded afterwards, and we'll want to know about that. And he's been basically, what do you call it? He's my coach.
Yeah, he's plotted
he's giving
the
it an arc, hasn't he?
See.
Yeah.
And
he's been my coach. He's been coaching me. I sent him the first sort of 20,000 words just to see what he thought. And he gave me some little notes. But I find it much easier in general to not be working on my own and working with a dialogue of somebody, an editor, basically.
Which makes sense of why you might gravitate more towards theatre writing, which evolves, or script writing.
Yes, you're right. Unfortunately, it never sort of works like that. It would be more fun.
It is interesting to me. We do all have different things that are our favourite things to write, and what is most sort of disturbing to write. You know, I could sit here and say why acting and writing for film and theatre is much more exposing than when I wrote about my stalker or my phobia or my this, that, and the other. But it is a personal decision. It sounds, Nigel, like you would find, or you are finding, memoir inherently riskier than a bunch of things I know you've done that I would feel more risky.
Maybe. Risky in terms of what? Explain risky.
Okay, so
that's a whole other podcast.
It is a whole other podcast, which I will attempt to get down to 3 seconds and fail. Okay, what I meant was when I'm just going to pick a real life example because it's the easiest way for me to explain it, is when I had a stalker and when I wanted to write about that, it wasn't to go, poor me, look at me world. It doesn't hurt, but hey, it was to say I represented pure evil to her and she represented pure evil to me because I was Jewish and with the man she thought was hers. So I represented pure evil, and she was a physically violent anti-Semite. So she represented pure evil. And even as it was going on, even when I was talking to the police about it, there was something in me going, there is a story here. I need to explore this. I didn't do it in memoir because, yes, I'm not famous enough for that to come in first. But at the time, I was a fiction writer. I am a fiction writer. Processing it, giving it to other non-existent people, but keeping the heart of it, keeping what I felt needed and deserved to be explored, in the hope always when you're writing fiction that you do reach out for other people do feel less alone for having read it. That was what made sense to me.
Did you keep the names the same? And
no, I changed all of the location specifics, names, what race was being isted at, everything that I could change. I changed the circumstances.
So that you minimised risk.
I minimised exposure.
What was risk? you decided to,
Yeah.
yes, you minimise.
I don't think I minimised risk, because I think emotionally you do. It's Robert Frost thing, though, it is in the writer note, is in the reader type stuff, that if you don't go there, you can't expect somebody else to go there.
Okay, so let's decide which on the scale of risk scale.
Yeah.
Is emotional risk greater than actual physical risk to you, or libel or career risk? When I say risk, I mean actual being cancelled, actual being
Okay.
actual hurting the ones you love. Finding that I've made an emotional risk to myself and that I might not be, I'll go to some therapy for that. I mean, risk at a level of actual risk to people that you love, or risk to exposure, as in I'm now in a vulnerable place because I've exposed something, or admitting illegal things, or that those seem to be on a higher level of risk than whether I would be upset personally by this, what my feelings would be about this is surely something I can deal with a bit more. I agree with you, to fictionalize it is even better. Then you're safer, aren't you?
I suppose it's a question of what do you most want said, because I'm not saying I know, because I don't, but looking at Jeremiah Born in Time, looking at Making Other Plans, sort of looking back at some of the other things I've read as well, there are passions in common, there are thoughts in common, right? Every writer, every human being has got certain things that they are revisiting, and at some point, I guess it's about, what do I want to say? What are the different ways I want to say it in? There will be things that come up again and again, and that's not being repetitive, it's just being human. So when, for example, one of my favorite novelists, Maggie O'Farrell, when I read her memoir, I am, which is however many brushes with death, 18 brushes with death, I think it was, and you then unpick which stories she's been revisiting based on something real. It does not detract from the stories at all, but it shows what the emotional causes were that made you go, what if, in this direction. And I do find that fascinating, but I guess fiction for me is, well, luckily more fun. I don't have a choice, it's the one that's in front of me, but it is more fun to do those what ifs more freely, because as you say, you're not pointing at someone, you're not going, it's limited to this person and this situation, you're saying here is something bigger.
I agree. What's the quote? Is it Graham Greene or something? Where the difference between a journalist and a novelist is a novelist can tell the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Very good.
Yes. And I mean, I guess, like, in terms of memoir and sort of choosing the bits that you tell and choosing how you tell them, I mean, I'm always reminded of historiography and that whole practice of sort of the fact that there's lots of people who have written about history, but because it's from their point of view, can it be wholly true? And then you have people who look at all of the different people who have written about history, and then they write their own version. And several layers deep of this sort of geographical excavation that you can go on through different writings about different histories, you are so far from what probably happened. Almost like, I mean, if we've got that situation going on with history in our world, and then you're sort of coming at a memoir, and you are.
I haven't read it yet, but my wife was just reading it. It's on my pile now. Melting Point by Rachel. I can't remember her last name. Begins with a C, and there is not a word written by her in it. It's just quotes. It's about how early 19th century Zionism started, and they tried to make what we would now call Israel happen in Texas.
Okay.
They thought, we'll take all the Jewish people to Texas. And she's done so much research that she decided to take her own voice out of it. And all it is, and it's structured, and it has a curve on it, each chapter, is quotes from other people, contrasting with each other. So you're reading a whole book, but her voice isn't in it. She's taken her voice obviously is in it subliminally by what she's chosen, but she doesn't say, and then I thought this, or then this might have happened, or then that. She just literally quotes. It's just lists.
The ultimate show don't tell.
Yeah. The ultimate show don't tell. Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating thing. I read the first few pages, and then
when the memoir is sitting somewhere behind me and is done and is on a shelf, what do you want writing wise? What comes next? What would you want to come next?
I mean, if I've done it, what am I going to do next?
What do you want to do? That's a different question. You've got the magic wand.
Yeah.
You choose.
What I want to do is volume 2 of Jeremiah Bourne, because there's meant to be 3 of them. But it also seems to me that in that genre, it was an attempt to write genre, because I thought that's what people enjoy. It's actually kind of what I enjoy. And instead of trying to get too clever, why not try and actually master the genre? Mm-hmm. It's not a really very known genre. It's Terry Pratchett, I suppose, is the thing I would be most trying to emulate. I'm the voice in many of his audiobooks, so I got very acquainted with Terry Pratchett. And it seems to me that in that kind of fantasy world, time travel, comedy, that basically people like series of books these days, don't they? Publishers do, but also the readers do. They don't. People who've read Jeremiah Bourne want to know the next bit, what's happening. And I've got tons in my mind of how it develops and things. So I left quite a lot of question marks. And I'm nearly there. In fact, that's what I was meant to be doing this year. I'm nearly there to write volume 2 of Jeremiah Bourne in time. I just was on holiday, which gave me a bit of headspace to think. And I made some of the bigger decisions of what not to do and what to include and what not to include. So I'm nearly there, and hopefully by the end of the year I hope to have a first draft of that.
Brilliant.
And then I've got to move on to the third one. I've done a lot of work on it. I did at one point have about 5 story ideas, but then I'm sort of shaving them down to try and make a trilogy. The trouble is, one of the characters turned out to be more interesting.
And is now telling you that it's their book.
It's not the lead character. No, well, that's what I've just done, is I've found a way to keep it as the Jeremiah Bourne trilogy, so that character's not going to take, because I was so carried away with that character that I started going down that road, and I thought that's not going to work. That'll have to be like a spin-off.
Or if trilogy means to you what, as Douglas Adams fans, trilogy means to the 3 of us, which is definitely more than 3. It might
increasingly inaccurately named trilogy.
It was the trilogy of 4 when I was growing up.
The trilogy of 4.
Then 5.
The character who kind of, in my mind, I found, I can write for this one. Much easier to write. She'll still be there, but she won't be taking over. Whereas up until I took this holiday, but she's just much more interesting, and I wanted to do that. But I found a way of sort of putting her to one side.
From writing memoir, having written scripts and novels and poetry for a big chunk of your life, I mean, what are the things that you've had to learn? What are the techniques that you've learned from writing memoir?
Well, as I say, I'm not really. This is an experiment. This memoir that I'm writing at the moment. So I don't think I can hold forth on.
Imagine he hadn't said memoir at the end of a question about all the kinds of writing you've done, and only mentioned at the end of it the one that you haven't had published yet.
Yeah.
What do I learn? I just say get to bed early, probably not drunk.
Okay, yeah.
Probably a good idea. Sober early. Going on a walk is good. So what I would do, if I'm going to bed early, I would look at what the task of tomorrow is before I go to bed, because your subconscious can do a lot of work for you. Subconscious will do all the work if you let it. Robert Louis Stevenson saying, if only, I think it was him saying, so I could write a good book if I could get out of my own way, so let it. So brief yourself and then go to sleep. I find often as well, if I do sew myself to the desk, as they say, sit down, everything's ready, I'll fall asleep. And my feeling is you shouldn't beat yourself up about that. It doesn't mean, I couldn't do any work. It means, no, I want to do that work now. So I've got a very comfy chair over there that's easy to fall asleep in, because a snooze, there's nothing like a snooze, and then you wake and go, off we go. I think you've got to think of yourself and your psyche, your whole psychological, your biorhythm when you're tired, and think, no, I'll make use of the times that my subconscious is going to be working. So I'll let it. And then can't really think of anything else. I mean, I used to do, for all the script writing, I did a lot of those story structure type books and the Robert McKee and the thing. And I can't really, I mean, it's all very useful to know that. You do need to know all that stuff. But I'm not sure that if you obey it I suppose that's what Robert McKee used to say is, if you obey this completely, you will get your scripts on television.
But there's a danger that you're doing it by numbers.
If you do it by numbers, you probably will get your series on television.
Yeah.
I've never achieved that.
Yeah. Some of the people that we've had on the podcast, Nigel, have talked about variety of writing as being very good for their productivity. So if you wake up one morning and don't fancy working on the story about X, they've got a story about Y going on as well. And today might be a Y story day and tomorrow might be an X story day. Is that something that works for you? I mean, you've mentioned Jeremiah Bourne kind of on the back burner, but do you ever wake up and think, I'll do a bit of Jeremiah and then go back to the memoir?
No. And what I do find is that if there's something I'm meant to be doing and I'm meant to be doing it, my imagination gets much more fertile in the other place.
Yes.
See, that's why I think Gareth, who we were talking about, why he does what I do this as well, because I can procrastinate sideways. Has that never happened to you? If you've got 2 projects on the go and the brain is going, oh, look, there's something shinier over there. If I've got 2 writing projects, I can procrastinate in a more efficient way because I go between them. Has that just never happened to you?
It not really. Like I said, I was just on holiday. So I was working up until we went on holiday. When I'm on holiday, so I think, well, I'm on holiday. And I've made many notes on the other project. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, my imagination hasn't been working on it for a while. So I've done my procrastinating bit and I've written the notes, but I've just before this talk, I've taken them out of the notebook, stapled them, put them in the file, and that's it. I'm not going back to those
until
I'm back on the because it takes so long anyway that I set myself deadlines. You've got to. I was meant to have finished this by sort of next week, and I won't be finished. But I was trying to set myself a deadline, and there isn't time to. I can't say, I feel like doing this. That would be a disaster. I feel like writing something. For me,
it's got to be much more linear for you.
Yeah, I've got to say, no, by the end of this week, that's 5,000 words a week at least. And the chapter I've got to write is that chapter. Yeah. Here are the notes for that chapter, and they're going there. And if I veer from that, that'll be chaos.
Yeah. See, I'm the same. I think people who have like multiple different projects on, I actually find that very difficult because I get in a headspace, and then when I leave it one day and then I pick it up the next day, it's so much easier when it's the same thing because it's like a continuation of the same session almost, and then whatever happens in between is like, dinner, talking to people, whatever. I mean, maybe that says a lot about my creative brain, blah blah blah. Who needs that, right? And then the rest of it's just like a single linear thing, whereas if I'm jumping between projects, it's like suddenly I'm having to change track.
Yeah, things might get osmosis between the two would be a disaster. Writing the wrong character or
the style changes or the perspective changes or something. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if you had a dedicated space where not only could you just carry on with all the in-between, you could actually have it open on the page on the desk and nobody would have touched it. You don't even have to close. Everything is exactly as you left it. You go have a bit of light.
This is my shed theory is that someone working on multiple projects, you have a shed for each. In the way that Roald Dahl had his writing shed. So you'd have a thriller shed with a gun painted on the door, and you'd have a sci-fi shed with spaceships hanging from the ceiling.
No, I could manage like that. Yeah, yes, that sounds
you're
good.
A shed people.
I did have an office once. I had a room and I had 3 desks in it. Okay. One was for writing, and the other 2 were for writing projects.
That's the beginning.
And did you
shed
stick
theory.
to that when you had 3 desks? Did they keep their jobs?
Yeah, because you it's confused these days, isn't it? Because you want to research something and you don't go get the book out. You just Wikipedia it from where you are, and that's dangerous because you could say, "Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that." You could wander off into and think, "Oh, that's on Twitter." So I'll just and you could get
relevance rabbit hole.
Yeah,
you could go down that, but on the whole, I'd stick to that. I mean, this was before internet. And it meant you could leave it open on the desk.
Yeah.
You just say, look, so that's Nicholas Craig project. There he is. But we're not doing that today. We're doing this over here.
Yeah, laptops
just to
have
keep
done for that.
You need space and sheds.
Nigel, do you have any thoughts and advice for writers that are maybe thinking about having a go at writing about real events for the first time?
I am one of those. This is my first time. But when I say it's my first time, obviously I've been writing poetry all these years.
Oh, yeah, exactly,
and basically, oh no, it isn't.
But also, I did have a file on my computer called AB, which is autobio. And I went back to it when I thought I'm going to do this. And I was quite surprised by how much was in there, events that I'd written. And I was quite chuffed to think, how much have I written down of everything? It was more than I expected, for instance, but that won't end up in the book. But I still think it's worth having done it. There was one piece I read. I used to be friends with Faye Weldon. And I went to stay with her one weekend, and it made a big impression on me with her and her husband at the time, Nick. They divorced and she's died now. And they were very eccentric. And I just wrote quite a long form piece, much bigger than would have been an article. I mean, a lot about every detail I could remember about that weekend. And I don't know, I was going back over my material. I was so pleased to find that. I thought, it was worth doing. It doesn't matter. When I come to do a book, as I say, you think, right, what's relevant, what's not relevant. I can cherry pick from all of that material. And I picked out few bits and pieces from those sort of diary pieces, as it were. But I was surprised by how much I just put down, just keep putting it down and looking back over. It's like looking back over old photo albums and stuff. That's what I found reassuring, is rather than just, because as I said, I was very reluctant to write a straight memoir. It makes me uncomfortable. Also thinking, all they want to know is showbiz stuff. So you write down the showbiz stuff and it's quite boring, for a reader, unless there's some emotional something behind it. And so I was quite reassured to go back and think, gosh, I've been diary keeping. I've been, there was a life there.
Yeah.
Pick out bits and pieces. And that weekend made a big impression on me. Or this event when I was in a boat and I felt, I don't mind dying now. On a boat. I read one piece. I've forgotten, that I'd written, I don't mind dying because this is a perfect place. Just a little piece like that. And it made me think, oh no, I have, that there is a life that's not just what would be on the cover, beside myself, picture of Neil and me. There's all sorts of stuff gone on. I would have forgotten all that if I hadn't written it down.
Yeah. So
will there be other versions of you maybe in the background of the cover then? Because you're not just you and Neil, you're so many. Will there be others?
I'd like to think that you've got to draw the line somewhere. One of the pieces I came across is long, and I'm thinking at the moment, well, maybe I should just completely separate that out and make it a separate book. It's about drugs and travel and families and being ill. But I found a piece it's about 35,000 words long.
Wow.
Which is half a book.
Well, yeah, that's
me.
So I thought, oh, right. Well, maybe I should take that to one side and consider it as a project.
Yeah.
It's a thing. It's dated and it's, you need to start again, but it's actually about something. Yeah.
You gave yourself a piece of advice earlier, which I'd like to echo as we come to finish, about how as writers we get out of our own way, and acknowledging, and this is something we have talked about before, but it is so important and so well put, that acknowledging that you are a morning writer and that means being asleep at a sensible hour and probably not being drunk is going to have helped, and things like that, and making your life look like it needs to in order to get you into the mental and desk space that you need to be in. And being honest about that. Something else we've talked about is how we might look at other people and go, oh, well, if I was a proper writer, I'd write at nighttime, or if I was a proper writer, I'd write in the morning. And whatever your brain and body need is an intrinsic part of you, and to know how to listen to that. to make your life fit it?
I think so. I mean, Dennis Potter did a program on telly he made based on a book he'd written. And I was trying to write my own book at the time. So I asked him, how long did it take you to write? All the usual questions. How long? Which hours did you work? All of that to write this book called Black Eyes. He said, it took me about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And you think, well, how did you do that? It's a short novel.
Okay. Well,
and he said, well, I have a flat, not my home, in Great Titchfield Street. And that's it. Once I've started, I can't stop. And he worked through the night, in the day, occasionally feeding himself. He literally meant 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Weeks or whatever.
Just solid work.
And he just said, because he said, once I've opened the Pandora's box, whatever it is, I can't stop until I get to the end. That's it. I'm going to finish it.
Wow, that's quite intense, isn't it? And
it's a bit intense. I don't think it's particularly impressive, that.
I also don't think it's particularly accessible, because so many people, I'm sure, would absolutely love to be able to do that. But life kind of demands that you not just disappear for 3 weeks.
But this is what it is. You pay for it somewhere, don't you? That he will have paid for that in other areas of life. And we all make a bargain with ourselves. It's kind of about being honest with yourself about what your own bargain is, isn't it? That if we do want relationships, if we do want all of this stuff that, let's face it, we're drawing on at some level anyway, we need it.
No, I don't know. It's just to sort of make the point that it's different for everybody, isn't it? I always used to think Graham Greene did 2,000 words a day. I read that, which is quite a lot. But then I was reading a book called Graham in Capri by Shirley Hazard. And she used to spend a lot of time in Capri, where he had a house. And there's an awful lot about him and the social life she had with him. And it's I'd recommend it. It's a highly interesting book, because he turns out to be quite a tricky fellow. But she says, Graham was sort of unavailable to any of us until he'd written his 300 words a day.
300?
300 words a day. And then he'd been out drinking with the rest of us, and we'd all go off to Capri. Then we went to the caves in the so-and-so, sunbathing and this and that. And you think, 300 words
do that before breakfast.
Yeah. And that's when he was writing. It's like not when he's retired, or it's like he was writing, I can't remember which book, quite an important book at the time.
300 words a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
they must have been gold.
Yeah.
Very good 300 words.
Solid.
But he was also already a internationally successful writer by that point. So he had the confidence.
Yeah, to slow it down a bit. Rachel, we are at the end of the podcast now. We always end these podcasts with a challenge for our listeners.
Well, no.
What
okay, we do.
Today?
I'm actually just going to reiterate something that Nigel brought up that probably is the foundation of everything worth having.
Indeed.
Which is a creative I dare you. I dare you to notice, not judge, notice. What are the ways I'm standing in my own way? What are the things I think I need to be impressive about? Or what are the things I think I'm not allowed to talk about? And I dare you to take one of them and know that no one's ever going to see it but you, because that is a first draft, and first drafts are sacred. Chris has forbidden me from saying vomit draft. He got very cross with me and Emily because we were saying vomit draft and not. So I'm not going to say vomit draft. I am going to say piss it right out, as James Graham once said about his early work.
That's much worse. Carry on.
Well, it's James Graham, most influential playwright of my generation. And I did mention the Finborough Theatre's toilets in a bad way, so I'm now mentioning their playwright in a good way.
Is diarrhea allowed?
Absolutely, isn't it, Chris?
Sure.
Remember, I edit this as well, Nigel. So anything can stay, anything can go.
This is how we find out how much we've pissed him off. But getting out of, or vomited you off, absolutely. He started it. But getting out of getting out of our own way in all of the ways we can, because it's not for us to judge whether what we've got is a good idea or worthy or anything. It's the curiosity to get it out in whatever form of human getting stuff out appeals to you as an image. But I dare you to get out one thing that you are curious about, that you realise.
You mean right now? Yeah. now.
Now, as a
I'm game if you are.
as a
This is something
people
take away.
take it away. Do it if they want
Yeah.
to.
It's a
This is
thought.
like homework,
It's homework, yeah.
but like not
Yeah.
homework.
We're still
It's-
looking for that wonderful word that means homework with completely opposite connotations to homework. I'm still in the market for that word.
Yeah.
But no, honestly, the thing I would say, the creative I dare you, is give yourself one little hook you can let yourself off, one little thing that is standing in your way, or one little thing about the time you know is your best time to write, where you have to do something else and go, what if I don't today? Maybe it's that. Maybe it's not about content. Maybe it's about process. But take one step.
Could have done an hour and a half's worth of work today writing. So the podcast is the thing that's in the way. Is that what you meant?
There is a very
preferably
this
not.
will be edited.
No, it's a good question. There is this really dangerous category that people have called writing adjacent. I did writing adjacent work today. I did my research. I did my marketing. I appeared on this podcast, and I did writing adjacent work, so it counts, and that's dangerous.
No, there's the sort of publicity machine. The going around festivals and readings, and I met Ian Rankin, and he told me he could spend his whole year now not writing, just going around doing readings and selling and doing signing and going and talking and podcasts, etc. So one has to be careful not to get taken in by the whole machinery that's necessary to sell.
The being a writer instead of writing.
Yeah.
Well, to put yourself out there, because unless you do, you have to put yourself out. Getting a balance in that is difficult.
Well, Nigel, we're going to end with an opportunity for you to put yourself out there a little bit. How can people find out more about you, order your books, pre-order maybe your memoir when such a time comes? Is there a website?
I've got a website, yes. It's just myname.co.uk. Jeremiah Bourne is on Unbound. And I just looked on Amazon before we started. And annoyingly, Jeremiah Bourne, what comes up is an audio drama of it that we did years ago, which is not the whole book. It's only a one slice of the story. So the book is the full story. Making Other Plans you can get on Amazon. Surprisingly enough, the poetry book, you put it in and there it is on Amazon. There's no problem. Jeremiah Bourne you can get on bookshop.org. But it's an Unbound book, meaning Unbound, the publisher who crowdfund. And very shortly, I will be putting up Jeremiah Bourne 2. So please, everybody, do pledge for that when you see it come up.
If people follow Unbound or signed up to their newsletter, they'll get a notification when it goes live. So we can prompt them to do that.
Yes, I would definitely go to Unbound. Very interesting publisher, quite a hard work experience because you have to get so involved online. Very nice people, very pleasant, and really good editor. Really
we should also mention your Patreon, not least because my friend Jonathan runs it and would kill me if I didn't.
Yes, I've got a Patreon account where I'm gradually putting up all of my archive on there, but also all sorts of news
and that'll be a good place for when this comes out, won't it? That'll be on there.
Yes, that's my news and my art. Bookshop.org, pretty good. If you go there, you can order Jeremiah Bourne in Time. Hive, I think, as well. So those are the two books I've got out at the moment. In terms of memoir, I don't have a deal. I don't have it on. If anybody listening is an agent or a publisher, which is not very likely, is it?
You never know.
We get all sorts listening to the podcast.
Well, I don't have a deal on it, but in a way, I feel freer like that. I think it's pretty. It's only been possible to nearly get to the end of this first draft because of not having a deal. Because I can write what I feel I want to write. If I had people breathing down my neck,
they'd want it to go in particular directions.
They probably would, or I'd feel they would. And so, yes, it'll be out shortly. And if anybody does have a good idea for a title,
he's offended now. He's offended now. He thinks he's not the title anymore.
Neil,
I design myself. Yeah.
Beside myself.
Yeah.
Around myself.
Well, listeners, there's a challenge for if any of you has got a good title for Nigel's memoir, then please do
There's absolutely no
there's
money.
no money in it, but there will be prestige.
That's a very good title.
Oh my God.
Well, that could subtitle all that we do, I think. There's no money in it.
There's absolutely no money.
So, Nigel Planer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting, really entertaining.
And as always, Emily Inkpen, Rachel Knightley, thank you for being with us on the Writers' Gym today.
And thank you, Chris
Thank
Gregory.
you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Writers' Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writers' Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writers' Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writers' Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.